today I'm honored to introduce our first guest speaker, our keynote speaker, Paul Greenwood, who comes to us all the way from San Diego, California. Paul has got a really long history around the issue of elder abuse. Was a longtime prosecutor in San Diego, out there, and helped prop up their elder abuse unit basically from the scratch when he was assigned to it way back when, which I'm sure he'll share more details with you all. But he's pretty much, in my opinion and many others, that he's kind of one of the national experts around this issue, and is going to share about how we can use some strategies to, continue our efforts here around elder abuse and continue to advance them here in Wisconsin. So I will turn it over to Paul. Thank you for joining us, Paul.
My pleasure, Mike, and thank you all. Good morning. Thanks for tuning into this session for triad training, and I'm very grateful for Mike giving me this opportunity to focus on basically sharing lessons that I've learned from being in the courtroom for over 22 years prosecuting these kinds of crimes. So I call myself a newly retired deputy district attorney from San Diego, although you can probably tell I'm not exactly your classic Southern California dude. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. The reason we are doing this is to try to ensure that in whatever capacity we work, maybe we're a neighbor, maybe in our church setting, whatever it is, we are going to come across potentially an older adult who may already be a victim of some form of elder abuse. And we want to make sure that we put this very much into the spotlight. One thing I've learned from being a prosecutor in the courtroom with these kind of cases is it takes all of us to keep our older adults as safe as possible. And just more about my background, the fact, how did I become a San Diego prosecutor from being a UK lawyer? I was a solicitor in the southern part of England for 13 years. I had been born and raised, went to law school in the north of England, and ended up in San Diego in 1991, thanks to true love. This is my wife from San Diego. I actually met her when I was traveling around the country of the US in 1973. Literally walked into a Baptist church, young adult Sunday school program, and the only empty seat was sitting next to this gorgeous young lady. So I sat down next to her, and I married her, but not in the same service 5 years later. So we got married in August of 1978, and so we're now in our 43rd year. After the 13 years after we got married of working as a lawyer in England, and who can blame her? My wife was desperate to get back to some blue skies and sunshine. So she begged me to bring her back to San Diego. And we arrived in 1991 with a 10-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. I was totally jobless, unqualified. And so I had to quickly figure out a plan. So I signed up for the California bar and sat with 1,000 other students in August of 1991 and managed to convince the bar examiners that I knew more than I really did. Thankfully, I passed the bar. I joined a civil law firm for 2 years, but didn't really enjoy civil litigation. And so in 1993, I got my big break. The DA's office was hiring, and I think was the first person to run down to the courthouse, fill out the application, and I basically begged the DA's office to hire me. And they took a risk because at that time I was not a citizen. I was a green card holder. So they had never hired a non-citizen before. So they took a chance with me, and I'm so glad they did. San Diego Prosecutor's Office has been known for innovation. And one of the best programs we've ever started is using in-court service animals to accompany older adults, children, and adults with disabilities into the courtroom. It's been phenomenally successful. And so I always show this photograph wherever I go, trying to encourage prosecutors to adopt a similar program to help their victims. It's wonderful. We've also adopted rooms in our office. One thing I learned from having been involved with older adults is they don't mind coming to court as long as they don't miss their favorite TV program. So we converted an office into a living area just for older adults. So they put me in the family protection division, and that's where I spent 22 years prosecuting these crimes. And I can honestly tell you that not one day in my 25 years at the DA's office did I ever regret being a prosecutor. I loved every minute. So why on earth in March of 2018 would I quit? Well, it's all about the numbers. I had just celebrated my 25th year work anniversary. I had just turned 66, and I'm now approaching quickly next March, my 70th birthday. But I realized back in 2018 that if I were to stop the full-time work, there was something that I could claim, which was Social Security, add that to my county pension, and that seemed to make sense. But I also have to warn those of you who are on this webinar who are younger than your 60s, things change. Take a look at what happens between the year 1979 and 2019, okay? Just compare what's going on. And I show this slide to a lot of older people in their 70s and 80s, and they really connect with this slide. There's a lot of truth in it, okay? So in 79, you went to a disco. In 2019, you went to Costco. So this number also impacted my decision to leave the office. No, this is not my county pension. This was a headline that I was hearing about in the early months of 2018. And it appeared in a Bloomberg Press later on in the year as well. And at the same time, I was getting calls from all over the United States asking me to come to their jurisdiction to help energize and hopefully persuade people to get more involved in multidisciplinary team approaches to tackling this rising crime, particularly elder financial abuse. This number also impacted my decision to leave the office because my wife and I were celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary, and we literally had a discussion. What is the most meaningful gift we can give to each other after 40 years? And we both agreed it was time. And so I've been very fortunate that we have been able to spend more time together. Boy, we didn't realize though how much time we would spend thanks to the dreaded coronavirus. So my journey into this whole area began in January of 1996. I've been in the office almost 3 years. The elected district attorney called me into his office, and I could tell he was upset. And we had this discussion, and I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I just had a very troubling phone call from Adult Protective Services." I said, "Who are they?" He said, "I don't know, except I know they're upset." I said, "Why?" He said, "Apparently we are ignoring a huge escalating crime called elder abuse." And I asked, "What's that?" He said, "I don't know, but you're about to find out, because I've just named you as the first ever head of the first ever elder abuse prosecution unit." And that was my assignment. And frankly, I have to be honest, when I left his office, I thought, well, I'll do it for 3 years, but I'm not going to stay into that much longer than 3 years. I want to get back into the hardcore mainstream crimes that we all want to prosecute. How wrong I was, because this became my assignment for the next 22 years. And I've had people ask me a lot along the way, why did you spend so many years just in that one area of prosecution? Why didn't you venture out into other areas? And I said, it's easy. 2 reasons. And here they are. This is a photo of my late parents. Sadly, I lost my father, age 92, to advanced Alzheimer's in December of 2014. And I lost my mom in November 2019, age 96. But I don't think of my dad primarily as an Alzheimer's victim. You know how I remember him? As this. I learned when I was 7 years old that my dad had been a B-25 bomber pilot in World War II, that he had survived 79 bombing missions, and that on 78 of his bombing missions, he landed perfectly back in the UK. But on mission number 4, on June the 4th, 1944, it all went wrong. He was intervened by enemy fighter aircraft. His B-25 was shot down over the Adriatic. He almost drowned, but thankfully, Yugoslav fishermen pulled my dad out of the drink, and thanks to them, I am here today. And then there's my mum. What can I tell you about her? She is the finest cook of scones anywhere in the United Kingdom. That's all I can tell you about that. And she was a magnificent mother, and I miss her a lot, as I do my dad. But I am one of these people that happens to believe that my parents represented the finest generation. So back to my assignment. They gave me everything I needed, right? An office, a phone, a computer, except for one major problem. Nobody from law enforcement was bringing me any cases. All I was dealing with was silence. And this poster became my motivating factor, not just for the 22 years, it still is today. Because what I try to remember every day is, what can I do today to break through this wall of silence that is so often there? And so this is why we want to put the spotlight on elder abuse in Wisconsin today, because it's going on all around you. And yet there is a degree of silence, primarily coming from the victims. The Attorney General for Kansas has called elder abuse the silent epidemic of our time, operating in the shadows. That is so true. And so the challenge for you and I today is, what can we do to break through this barrier of silence? And then, of course, it's bad enough anyway in normal times. When you add a pandemic to the mix, this is what you get. It's a perfect opportunity for perpetrators to wreak havoc amongst our older adults. And for some of you on this call today, I hope that you're focusing on an older relative within your extended family. And I want you to be thinking of that person, especially if they live alone. And the question I want to challenge you with is it possible that today that relative that you're thinking about is already potentially a victim of some form of elder abuse? Unfortunately, there could be a very high degree of possibility that they are already a victim, because they're not going to tell you. And if you believe the headlines, then we know that this is a major problem because of the pandemic. So it's been called, elder financial abuse has been called a virtual pandemic. Again, financial exploitation and scams on the rise, on the rise, on the rise. I mean, everywhere you look. And it's not just financial elder abuse. All forms of elder abuse are on the rise. But the good news in Wisconsin is that your Attorney General in the last couple of years has launched a fantastic resource. And so I was really impressed in preparing for today's webinar to find out that you have a very good resource here in this new elder abuse hotline. If you don't know about it already, you need to research it. And this is the number on the screen there. It's 833-586-0107. Or you can visit the website, which is reportelderabusewI.org. So there's the number. And by the way, I will try to make this outline without the photos available through Mike Austin and others, so you can actually get this, because I have to whip through these slides pretty quickly. You can also, if you suspect elder abuse, you can report it online, which is great. I was really pleased to see this. So this is making it very accessible and very easy, clear instructions on how to get the information. So again, here's that elder website. So please, if you've not seen it before, check it out. It's really very impressive. And not only that, you can go to various resources on the website. Types of elder abuse, are you at risk, report it. You know, it's really, really effective. It's got materials, you can download ads, brochures, posters. So you can distribute all this information in your communities to get it out there to the senior population. And then you've got links to Adult Protective Services, ADRC, and to the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and which covers Medigap as well. So we know from seeing what's going on with headlines, with the pandemic, that these various forms of elder abuse are on the rise. I just noticed we're up to 100 participants. This is so cool. Well done, Wisconsin. You're doing great. So here's proof that the numbers are on the rise, okay? Staggering increase since 2001. And it's only going to get worse. You know, I was in this field for 22 years. We made some great dents into this. We prosecuted a lot of people. But you know what? It's going to get worse. And what are some of the reasons for it getting worse? Demographics is obviously one of them. Do you realize that today, in one day, do you know how many people will turn 65 in the United States of America? 10,000. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And then within the next 14 years, there'll be more people in this country over the age of 65 than children under the age of 18. Now, I think we need to be persuading our state legislature and our federal legislature about this, because we have got to fund the Adult Protective Services program as effectively as Child Protective Services. But when you look at the number of staffing for Child Protective Services in any state compared to Adult Protective Services, APS is the poor neighbor. It's terrible. So we've got to convince the people in power that we've got to beef up the resources for Adult Protective Services. Another reason is we're all living longer. And you know what the secret is? Have Smuckers for breakfast. If you have Smuckers, you will live to be 106 or 104. My favorite centenarian, though, is this lady. A true story. She lived to be 103, still smoking 7 cigarettes a day. Unbelievable. Now, in Wisconsin, how is the aging affecting you? Well, look, your population of 65 and older projected to increase by more than 70% in the next 20 years. So we've got to prepare for that. And this is, I thought this was interesting. So here's a map showing in 2020 where the percentage of older adults over the age of 65, actually over the age of 60, live. So in the lighter colored squares or counties, that's 17 to 20%. The dark blue is with the highest proportion of people over the age of 60. Okay, so they seem to like to live in Door County, Bayfield, Iron, Villas, and Adams last year. Look what happens within 14 years, more counties in dark blue, okay? And then in 2040, even more counties, including Crawford. So you can see it's a graying society. Now, under your Wisconsin code, who are our victims that I'm talking about? We call it elder abuse, but there are two types of victims. They're called elder adults at risk and adults at risk. And elder adults basically is anyone 60 or older who has experienced, is experiencing, or is at risk of experiencing abuse, neglect, self-neglect, or financial exploitation. Now, the only part of that which I don't cover is self-neglect, because that is not a crime, okay? And then there's adults at risk, similar, but anybody over the age of 18 with a physical or a mental condition that impacts their ability to care for themselves. So those are the two definitions. What about mandated reporting of elder abuse in Wisconsin? Who's in that mix? Who has to report? Anybody on this list has to report as a mandated reporter, okay? So you've got various people there on that list. I didn't know what a perfusionist was until yesterday, but it's something to do with the heart and the lungs, something to do with medical issues anyway. So what do they have to report? They have to report anybody who's an elder or an adult at risk, imminent risk of serious bodily harm, etc., who's unable to make an informed judgment about whether to report the risk, or someone else who's at risk of serious bodily harm inflicted by a suspected perpetrator. And then in addition, reporters must report if an elder or adult at risk asks them to do that. So some of the dynamics that I had to deal with, and remember, I was coming into this totally new. I didn't know anything about elder abuse, and I had to learn very quickly. And one of the things I learned quickly was that a lot of seniors are afraid to report. They're embarrassed. They fear that by coming forward, somebody from law enforcement or government will take them out of their own homes and they will lose their independence. And sometimes they are fearful of retaliation. So what are we talking about? What behavior constitutes elder abuse? Well, obviously there's physical abuse, slapping, hitting, pushing, non-accidental injuries. You know, these are the kind of things that I'm talking about. This lady was attacked by her own son and he shoved a beer bottle into her eye. These are the defensive wounds where somebody's trying to block from being punched, or the bruising on the neck. And you know who the number one suspect for physical abuse is in Wisconsin? This guy. How do I say that with such confidence? Because I have prosecuted over 100 of these guys in San Diego, and I'm convinced that human nature is the same in Wisconsin as it is in California. So he lives in your neighborhood. He's living with his widowed mother. He's either divorced or he's single, and he's never left home, or he's just got released from prison. In most cases, he is lazy and unemployed, and he's living off his mother. And in most cases, he's addicted to either drugs, alcohol, or gambling. And because those addictions cost money, he steals from his mother. The first thing he steals is her jewelry, and he pawns it. And then sometimes some of these sons do have an untreated or undiagnosed history of mental illness. I'm talking about schizophrenia, bipolar conditions, and I did prosecute those mentally ill sons too, but I treated them very differently because I believe that those sons with mental illness do not belong in jail. You know, Tennessee called it well. They said, what do you call someone who abuses an 80-year-old woman? Son. And here's an example of one of my cases, the son who punched his mother, and the bruising is developing there. And the officer goes back 3 days later and gives me the evidence that I need. And that's the classic profile of your bully son that lives in your neighborhood in Wisconsin. I guarantee it. He's there. You just have to understand and identify the red flags for him. And what I found interesting and encouraging is that you now have a new state law regarding elder abuse, which just passed earlier this year in August, thanks to the efforts of people like Mike Austin and others. It's called the 2021 Wisconsin Act 76, signed into law by the governor on August the 6th. And again, I'll be sending out this outline so we don't have time to really go through it. But it does make physical abuse a standalone crime of elder physical abuse, okay? But previously, we didn't have one, so this is good. It also, this law creates an opportunity to freeze the assets of the defendant if they're charged with financial exploitation. And very importantly, it allows an elderly victim who wants to get a restraining order, rather than come to court because they're concerned about COVID, they can actually obtain the restraining order through a virtual appearance. So that's great. So this is one example of part of the physical abuse law. It's not everything, but it's just one part of the language. So if you intentionally cause bodily harm to somebody over the age of 60, under circumstances likely to produce GBH, great bodily harm, then you're guilty of a Class F felony. So that's just one example. So I'm really encouraged. And again, kudos to Mike Austin and to anybody else who was involved in getting this law passed. And what I found was really interesting is that this law will apply even when the defendant did not know that the victim was over 60. So the defendant can't come into court and say, well, Your Honor, don't blame me. I didn't know they were over 60. Well, tough luck, mate. You shouldn't have hit them in the first place anyway, whatever age they are. So the governor is quoted here as saying, older Wisconsinites are vulnerable to financial and physical abuse. So again, we're seeing a devastating, concerning rise in these crimes. So another form of abuse is emotional or mental abuse. And under your statutes, the definition of mental elder abuse is words or conduct designed to intimidate, humiliate, threaten, frighten, or harass, okay? And those are not so easy to prove because you don't have photos of an actual injury, but if you can get a recording, or you've got a letter or some video surveillance showing harassment, then that may be enough to present to prosecutors for prosecution. Unfortunately, sexual abuse is a hidden crime. It's out there, particularly in long-term care facilities. And CNN did a whole series of articles about this horrendous trend, and we've got to be more sensitive to this area. They call them the sick, dying, the raped in America's nursing homes. The Kansas City Star newspaper also did a feature on it. So it's out there. We want to be aware of it and be more vigilant about any reports. And that's why yesterday I teamed up with the Wisconsin Long-Term Care Ombudsman's Office to do a training for their staff. There's also neglect by a caregiver in Wisconsin. And your typical caregiver case involving, and these are the type of cases I prosecuted, where they willfully deprive the victim of medical attention or food or hygiene or ventilation, heat or light, where they may over-medicate the victim to keep them passive, or they may steal the medication to feed their own drug addiction. You end up with victims that are malnourished, semi-comatose, dehydrated, sometimes coated with feces, all those kind of things. But bed sores, decubitus ulcers is the biggest problem, or pressure sores. And I saw too many of these. And the worst ones are the ones that get to stage 3 and stage 4, where the sepsis really attacks the body and the ulcer is so deep that it goes down to the bone. That is criminal in my book. And then, of course, you've got the myriad of different types of financial exploitation. And, you know, over 65% of all the cases that I ever prosecuted involve some form of financial exploitation. Interesting that the US Centers for Disease Control, that we've heard so much about in the last 18 months, has called it a public health concern. And I think that's right, because if you've ever spoken to any elderly victim who's a victim of financial exploitation, it can impact their health very quickly. It can also impact their mental health. A lot of older adults who are victims of a scam or fraud spiral into depression. And sometimes there's an unexpected shortening of life. So gear up for this. There will be an explosion of these kinds of cases in the next few years, undoubtedly. And, you know, I like this graphic. It reminds me of some of the cases that I've prosecuted. And you would be possibly surprised at the type of people that I've prosecuted. I've prosecuted financial planners. I've prosecuted bank managers, lawyers, realtors. I've even prosecuted a Methodist choir director for ripping off his elderly female choristers. I mean, the list goes on. We think of elder financial abuse, oh, it's those scammers on the phone. Yes, they are there, but they're also within our own communities in Wisconsin. They're professionals, some of them, who are seeing opportunities to rip off elders. So the usual suspects are these: family members, top of the list, private or professional caregivers, for other professionals I just mentioned, bogus contractors doing home improvements. That is really rampant. And then, of course, your scam artists. Here's a caregiver in the middle here, the lady. She was taking care of the elderly man on the left. She stole almost $600,000 of his money. We've never found his body, but we know she murdered him. We don't know where, when, or how, but the jury agreed. And so they convicted this gal of not only elder financial abuse, but also of murder. This gentleman was the victim of a caregiver. Talk about heroes. He was a Pearl Harbor survivor. And he was ripped off and neglected by his caregiver. Thankfully, the neighbors called the sheriff and the adoptive services. And the deputy sheriff came in and broke down the door and rescued the elderly victim. He was found in the kitchen in terrible condition. And in the back bedroom, the caregiver had stashed away all the money that she was stealing. Here's a gentleman here. He's on his 97th birthday on the left. This is Jack Parks. He was murdered by his caregiver She stole his checks, forged his signature. He found out, he confronted her. She persuaded him not to report her to the police because otherwise she convinced him that he would end up in a nursing home. So 6 weeks later, she attacked him, set fire to his house, and he ultimately died, and she's now serving 17 years to life. Here's a bank manager that I told you about that we prosecuted. She worked for Chase Bank. She was stealing her elderly clients' customers' money. Go figure. Here's a bogus contractor where he called himself Father and Daughters Christian Construction Company. Now, if you call yourself Christian Construction Company, where would you put this flyer? Well, you know where you put it. You put it in your church parking lot on a Sunday morning, and you do not put it on the F-150 pickup truck. It's a waste of time. You put it on the Buick Regal. Why? Well, you know that only people over the age of 75 drive a Buick, right? I mean, it's obvious. So that's what he did to get his victims, and they would call him up and then he would rip them off. And then you've got these people posing as FBI agents. He knocked on the door of my elderly victim, showed her this fake badge, showed her the fake business card, and convinced her to go to the bank to withdraw all her money. Thankfully, we were able to arrest him and prosecute him. And then because of the pandemic, we've got more and more older adults at home relying on the phone and email. And then when they get these calls inviting them to invest in certain things, they fall for it. Here's one guy that I prosecuted. He convinced the IRS that he needed to form a charity. So he called himself Senior Rescue, and the IRS didn't do any checks on him. They took him at his word that he was going to build ramps at mobile homes for older adults with disabilities. And so he created Senior Rescue, and with his flashy brochure, he convinced 39 elderly victims in San Diego to part with their money. And he created these bogus investments that meant nothing. And then I had a gemstone scam defendant who ripped off this lady and about 15 other people all over the country, including an elderly gentleman who lived in rural Wisconsin. And they never met the scam artist. They kept sending him money, and what he would give them was a box with ribbons and certificates full of these, quote, gemstones. But they were worthless, and they were giving away thousands and thousands of dollars. There's the guy. Thankfully, he lived in San Diego. We were able to prosecute him, put him in prison, but also we were able to take his house. And thankfully, we were able to reimburse all our victims about 90% of all the money that they had been scammed out of. So that was a success story. Then you got the sweetheart scam, which is a really hot topic right now. And they come in all, primarily a lot of these scam artists are from overseas. Here's one gentleman from Ghana who has been indicted in Virginia. They steal the identity of real people, and they go onto dating websites and they look for classic victims, typically female victims on a website looking for the new love of their life. And then you've got the hijacking your computer scam, where they download software onto your computer and then they grab all your information. So really what I'm saying is, what can we do to help put a dent in this crime? There's something that all of us can do as part of Triad. I'm asking you if you would please get involved with a local multidisciplinary team that focuses on elder justice issues. We've started several in San Diego over the years that I've been involved. And one of the most successful ones we called Elder Protection Council, where we've invited professionals, law enforcement, prosecutors, adult protective services, but also members of the community, primarily retirees, to join us to talk about these issues. We decided to drop the word abuse because that is a negative word. We wanted it to be more positive, so we called it Elder Protection Council. And obviously for the last 18 months or so, it's been meeting virtually, but hopefully it will next year get back to meeting in real time in one-on-one. You know, I like this quote. We can do some good work on our own, but when we come together, such as with a triad organization, it's powerful. And one of the images I love from Hawaii is this symbol of being in an outrigger and then all rowing in sync together. And it's amazing when you are all working together, how you can make such great progress. The key, though, is networking. And I'm a great believer in starting local, grassroots level in your local area where you work and live, but then think big picture, think statewide, think nationwide, think globally as to how you can adopt methods that will impact your local community to reduce the numbers of elder abuse victims. I like words that begin with the same letter. So the letter C, I'm a great fan of collaboration, cooperation, and communication. It really works. And even through Zoom, we can do these 3 C's. So I'm hoping that you are already a member of some kind of multidisciplinary team. And I always say, well, who should be on this team? Lots of people. Obviously, social services, law enforcement, prosecutors, first responders, paramedics, EMTs, medical personnel from hospitals, triage nurses, the coroner's office, victim advocates, banks, credit unions, federal agencies, resource agencies such as Meals on Wheels, other gatekeepers like mail carriers, contractors associations, and so it goes on. One more thing that we can do, and I just want to spend a few minutes on this before I take some questions. I'll try to stop around about 10 to the hour, because I know you have another speaker at the top of the hour, but I'm hoping you will ask some questions and maybe at the 10 to the hour. But this is something very important. Watch out for some misconceptions that often prevent cases from being either investigated or prosecuted, okay? Here am I asking you to get more involved, to report cases, but if you do and nothing gets done, it defeats the object, right? Now, I found out early on in trying to realize why cases were not coming to me, I was trying to figure out the barriers, and these are some of the barriers. Now, again, this is no criticism of law enforcement or other prosecutors, it's just a fact. None of us really knew back then what we were involved in, and still some people need to be trained. But this was a big misconception amongst law enforcement and even amongst prosecutors that apparently elderly people make terrible witnesses. Wrong. But they would tell me the reason was because of forgetfulness. I don't believe that. I mean, I think that's illogical. This is more truthful, I think. I don't think age makes you necessarily forgetful. Multitasking can make us sometimes more forgetful. So those of you who are in the middle of multitasking right now, I sympathize with you. And what does your steering wheel look like? We all rely on stickies, okay? So forgetfulness isn't exclusive to older adults, okay? We're all subject to that area. And then there's the problem with characterizing older adults. And so a lot of law enforcement, particularly younger police officers and deputy sheriffs, would describe working with people in their 80s and 90s as being this. And it's not true, except for maybe number 3. They can sometimes be very long-winded if you let them. But I mean, I've had so many amazing opportunities to present victims like this. These are all victims out of the same assisted living facility. They all had their jewelry stolen from them by the maintenance guy who was in their apartments repairing things while they were downstairs having a cup of coffee. Can you imagine the impact of having 7 victims like these ladies lined up, ready to testify? No wonder the defendant changed his plea when his lawyer told him what he was about to face. And he signed up for 10 years state prison, and that was a man with no prior criminal record. Here's a 92-year-old lady in a facility who had early stages of dementia. Yep, some forgetful things, but you know what? She has got such jury appeal. Look at these 4. I mean, it was so funny. At first, my prosecutor colleagues made fun of me doing elder abuse cases, but after a few months, when they would see me going to court with some of the victims like this, they became insanely jealous of the victims that I had with me because they have such jury appeal. So the second myth, if my victim refuses to provide information, I was being told, that's it, Greenwood, we're going to close the investigation. Wrong. I mean, this mother, she typically doesn't want to come to court to identify her son as being the one who did this to her, or this lady, right? They don't want to come. So do I just let them get away with it? No, we need to figure out a way to break through the victim's wall of silence. We've learned over the years that from domestic violence that self-determination by victims isn't the answer. So if there's one thing that I would like you to take with you from today's webinar is this: we should never allow law enforcement to put this in a police report, okay? Because it's not up to the victim to choose which cases get prosecuted. For example, look at this. It happens all the time. Here's a case, look at the very bottom. The detective wrote this case non-prosecutable and will be cancelled as exceptional. Victim declined to prosecute. Wrong, wrong, wrong. But even in cases that the detectives did bring me, look at the bottom line. The detectives asked the victim if he wants to press charges. So I had to very politely tell the detective, don't ever ask that question again. It's not relevant. Look at Rhode Island newspaper headline. Again, it's giving the public the wrong impression. Victims do not get to press charges. Only prosecutors get to press charges. And why am I so insistent about that? Because human nature tells me that if you get away with something, you're going to do it again. So if the son gets away with hitting his mother one time, he will hit her again, and probably next time she'll break her hip or worse. Number three, if my victim gives the money voluntarily, they tell me it's not a crime. They say it's a civil matter. Wrong. Look at this headline in Forbes magazine. There's so much frustration out there because law enforcement, through no fault of their own, but through lack of training, isn't pursuing financial elder users because they call it civil. But I've learned that things aren't always how they first appear. Take this, for example, and your initial impression is, oh, it's a bird. It's a tropical bird. What is it? Is it a parrot? But look more closely. It's not a bird. It's a human being sitting on a tree stump with their hand over their head. Do you see the elbow now? Do you see the right shoulder? Do you see the right knee? Do you see the left foot? Why on earth would they be painted like that? I don't know. But it's a good training tool because it's the same with elder abuse allegations. Because what appears on the surface to be civil, voluntary, is not voluntary. It's been diluted by lies, undue influence, or by taking advantage of the mental impairment of the victim. Take this, for example. On the left is my victim with Parkinson's. On the very right is her late husband. Husband dies. Victim sells house, moves into assisted living facility where Crook in the middle is working. She has $300,000 from the sale of the house. He thinks, I want that. So one night while she's at dinner, he has the key to every room. He walks into her room. He removes photo of husband and wife. Adobe photoshops his photo into it. He then convinces my victim by showing her this bogus photograph that he is her long lost nephew. He convinces her to move out, to purchase real estate, putting it into joint names with him. When the adult children who live away find out about this arrangement, they get suspicious. They call the police. The police say it's a civil matter. Thankfully, it comes to our office. We investigate. We find this bogus photograph. We prosecute. And then I had a case involving theft of baby grand pianos. I had 19 elderly victims, all of whom had done the same thing. They'd gone to a store in San Diego. They'd done a consignment, wanting the owner of the store to hopefully sell their piano. But not one of these 19 victims ever got $1 for their pianos. None of them did over a 5-year period. So eventually one of the victims decided, quite rightly, this guy has stolen my piano. He went to the police. What did the police tell him? They actually sent him an email. It's a civil issue. And we're not going to be able to help. Wrong, wrong, wrong. The only way I heard about this case was through the TV. The victim was so upset with the police response that he went to the TV and told his story. And I got to see it on the news that night. And so then I was able to contact the reporter. And it was one of the easiest cases I've ever been able to prosecute. And then myth number 4, whenever there's a power of attorney, just because the person, particularly a family member, has a power of attorney doesn't give them the right to steal. And yet, so often police in Wisconsin and everywhere else, when they hear that the suspect is the power of attorney, they back off and they say it's a civil matter. But it ain't a civil matter in many cases, because we need to look at the circumstances. How was that power of attorney created? Where was it executed? Did the victim have the ability to even understand why this document was necessary? Whose idea was it to have the power of attorney? Has it been notarized or witnessed under the regulations appropriately? And just because you're a family member with a power of attorney, and just because you are going to be the only beneficiary if and when your relative dies, doesn't give you the right to take that property in advance. It's not a defense. So we also need to take advantage of all the resources out there. And the number one resource that I hope you will pass on is this. It's called EAGLE, Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement. This is a superb guide, and it's my goal that within the next 2 years, I can persuade every law enforcement agency in the country to adopt this training and use it on their phones, on their iPads, on their laptops. It's very user-friendly, and it covers every single state in the union. So, for example, you click on it and you go to a map of the United States. You double-click on the state of Wisconsin, and it gives you all the laws. It gives you all the information. And look at on the right-hand column there. It's give you resources for law enforcement. It's just excellent. So please, would you pass the word that your law enforcement agency needs to be trained? And then don't forget AARP, Fraud Watch Network. AARP are phenomenal. I've been a member for 19 years, I guess it is now. Yeah, 19 years. And I'm now working with Fraud Watch Network on helping to provide consumers with updates on how to avoid becoming the victim of a fraud and a scam. Don't forget Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They have some great information on their website, as does Federal Trade Commission. So particularly with the coronavirus scams, they have got some great information how to avoid those types of scams. And before I left the office, we prepared a document that I'm very proud of. It's called the Elder and Dependent Adult Abuse Blueprint. And if you'd like a copy of that, please just send me an email, and I'm going to give you my contact information right now. So reaching every victim in Wisconsin, that would be my goal, our goal. And I know it's virtually impossible, but unless we aim high, we won't achieve much. I hope that some of what I've shared this morning has helped you understand that we need to bring this subject more out into the open and put it into the public consciousness. We need to make our neighbors, our faith communities, our organizations more aware that this is going on, and it's going on all around us. Oh, sorry, not Utah, Wisconsin. That was another presentation. I slipped this in, but I like the 3 Ps. I talk about passion, purpose, and perseverance. So here is my contact information. There's my landline number. There's my email address, paul@greenwoodlawcorp.com, and there's my website. In the last 3 years, I have developed a 2-pronged approach. My law practice is now exclusively, number one, doing what I'm doing today, teaching, training, sharing the information that I've learned in the courtroom with various organizations. And secondly, I'm assisting other lawyers around the country when they're involved in particularly civil elder abuse litigation, and also prosecutors too, who need any help on figuring out how to prosecute a case. So I don't take on any specific clients. That's my 2-pronged approach, but you can get all the information from my website there. So with that, I'm going to see whether we have any questions. And Mike, Austin, maybe have you found any that we should be addressing right now?
Yeah, we've got a few that have popped up in the chat box here. I guess I'll take the first one from Tanya. She's asking, how does the DA get a referral for elder abuse?
Traditionally, it should come from law enforcement. But I found, because of the misconceptions out there and because so many law enforcement operate under those misconceptions, it's a civil matter, I didn't rely on law enforcement. So what we did was we went and did some outreach with Adult Protective Services. And so often Adult Protective Services would email me directly. The long-term care ombudsman would get involved with the resident issues, and also the state licensing agency for assisted living and skilled nursing would also reach out to me. I would also make my phone number at the office available to the general public. I didn't mind the general public calling me. I would just put a rule on it. I'll limit it to 10 minutes, but I'll get enough information from you to know whether or not we can direct this allegation back to law enforcement. So there's a number of ways, but this is why a multidisciplinary team approach is the best, by actually gathering information through that MDT source.
Apologies. I have one person asking, what do you do when the officers do a good job collecting information and working with the victims, but are hesitant to refer to the DA's office, as the DA has a history of not prosecuting cases or pleading out for significantly lesser charges?
That is a great question. I'm so glad you have asked this, and because it happens all the time, not just in Wisconsin, it happens in every single state. So this is what I would do. First of all, I would compliment the officers who've done a great job, praise them, praise their chief, tell the chief what a great job they've done. I would certainly write a letter to the county prosecutor's office, to the boss, but it has to be a letter, and talk about how well the officers have done this, that you believe in this case, that you believe this requires a very good look. I would also send a letter, and I hope you don't mind this, Mike, to your boss's office too, because I know that Mike's office, the Department of Justice in Wisconsin, is taking elder abuse very, very seriously. And maybe the resources in that county for the local prosecutor, they may be actually very willing to allow the DOJ Attorney General to look at the case as well. But write a letter, keep it brief, but and if that doesn't work, you can always contact me, and I'll see what I can do to take a look. And if I believe that it's a prosecutable case, I'll be more than happy to email the prosecutor's office in Wisconsin that you're talking about and try to convince them.
Absolutely. Some people have asked about access to your PowerPoint. Yeah, we'll be able to get that out to folks as we kind of move forward with our sessions here. Obviously, we're going to be recording this, or we are recording this as well. A couple other people had asked about more specific things about what's going on with initiatives within within Wisconsin. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about the initiatives that we have going on related to Wisconsin, and maybe address some of your needs. I'll drop my email again in the box, so please feel free to reach out to me for those that have asked that in the chat box. Do we have any other questions?
Actually, Mike, I just saw one. It came in, the ratio of senior physical abuse to financial abuse. You know, it's interesting because often there's a crossover between physical and financial, particularly with the family dynamic. So the son that I profiled, the addicted son, steals mother's jewelry. So that's the financial abuse. But then when she finds out and confronts him, he pops her in the face and gives her a black eye or a broken hip. So there's often a crossover, but typically 65% of all my cases involve some form of financial abuse, with some of those 65% also adding a component of physical abuse. And if there are not, I just want to give you, Mike, a shout out. I want everyone to know how much I've appreciated my friendship and communications with Mike Austin. He believed in me back in 2017 when he saw me speak in Milwaukee, and it has given me a tremendous opportunity to get to know some folks in Wisconsin. So thank you, Mike, for what you do. I know people like you don't get enough recognition, and you need to have that. So thank you, everybody, for being on this call today. And if ever I can be of help to you, Mike, or anyone else, please reach out to me, because remember, Eagle and creating multidisciplinary teams. And if I can help you get that done, I'd love to.
Absolutely. And the one thing I would add, I mean, a lot of people here on this this Zoom probably know this, but we have 72 counties in Wisconsin, Paul, and I think just about every one of them has an interdisciplinary team that meets at a varying times throughout the year. So you already have the structure. If you're finding a way that you need to get in there, please reach out to myself, or if you have a relationship with your adult protective services unit in your county, please reach out to them, because they would be aware of how to get connected there. So we appreciate you, Paul. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and appreciate those kind words back to me personally. Appreciate all your efforts to kind of get this moving nationally and sharing. There's very few prosecutors out there that talk about this and have the experience, and obviously the results that you have had over time. So really appreciate you taking the time and coming back to talk with all of us, and hopefully we can bring it back in person sometime soon.